Hello, everyone, and welcome back to With the First Link Season 2. We're very excited about this upcoming season. We wanted to give a content warning, though, ahead of this first episode, as it does touch on some sensitive topics like sexual violence, sexual health, and reproductive rights. Star Trek's great because it's willing to have conversations about some very difficult subjects, but you know what? If you want to skip an episode, that's totally fine, too. Thank you for your patience in waiting for Season 2, and we look forward to spending a whole other season of Next Generation with you.
Hello, and welcome back to With the First Link, the podcast that hopes to make our future as bright and as just as the one that we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we think that one way to do that is to recap and discuss the entire series, now going into Season 2, one episode at a time, doing our best to look at it all through an anti-oppression, pro-diversity, anti-racist lens. I'm Ruthie Kauper-Samoshi.
And I'm Matthew Simone, and today we'll be talking about The Child. This episode was written by Jaron Summers and John Pavil and directed by Rob Bowman. It first aired on November the 21st, 1988.
For today's check-in, this one's a little tougher because of stuff going on in the States right now with reproductive rights, around the time of recording this at least, with reproductive rights just being really up in the air at the moment. And I feel like while that feels like a natural check-in for today, I honestly just don't have the energy to talk about it because it's so stressful and so scary. Just a reminder of how fragile those kinds of rights really are.
Yeah, I remember learning more about the historical details of Roe v. Wade when I was in university. And you imagine that those laws are so firm that they will just always be around. And if there's anything we've been learning in the last couple, say, year and a half, 2 years, is how fragile society can be.
Yeah. And I also think that I think like, you know, people of color have been kind of sounding the alarm for a long time. And there's a lot of privilege in being able to like not be aware of that. Yeah, we need to listen when people sound that alarm. Holy moly. But one thing that I do think that I'd like to talk about, not necessarily formally in the check-in, but kind of as we go into the episode, is just there are a lot of problematic tropes in this episode, and the way that pregnancy is often depicted in especially science fiction and fantasy, but other kinds of media as well, really contributes to an idea that it's, you know, people with a uterus are just like a vessel to hold these other beings, and that pregnancy is not like a super complicated biological process that bodies go through, right? Like people are not just containers for babies. So, and that is definitely something that comes up in this episode pretty strongly. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're here for Season 2. We're excited to be here. We took a little break. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks for your patience and letting us take some time off, and to all the new followers.
Yeah, maybe you didn't want to listen for Season 1 because you're not that into Season 1 of Trek, and now you're listening. So welcome. We're excited.
So welcome, yeah. So thanks to new listeners, thanks to new followers on social media, so Instagram and Twitter, and we appreciate it. It's good to know that there's people listening to us, Ruthie.
It is
out
good.
there
it's nice.
In the Trekverse.
I mean, I'll talk about Star Trek regardless of how many people listen, but yeah, it's nice to know people are
totally
listening. Yeah.
There's always me to talk to. I'll always listen.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, should we get into the episode?
Okay, so in this episode, an energy being impregnates Counselor Troi and accidentally gives off a kind of radiation that puts the entire ship in danger. We also meet Dr. Pulaski, the new chief medical officer.
We do. We start with a very grand opening shot. We see like the Enterprise beside another ship looking really, really big.
It's always an Excelsior class ship.
Yeah.
In every one of those shots, it's always the same like, Excelsior
class,
ship.
Yeah. Yeah, we got some like big music, and then we see like a shuttle departing from a shuttle bay, and then we go to the bridge, and Worf is wearing gold, and he's got a new baldric with his sash is
Is
silver.
that what that's called? A
That's
baldric?
That's what it said on IMDb.
Okay, cool.
And I think he also has a new forehead piece. I remember reading somewhere that like the one he had in season 1 went missing, so they had to make a new one.
It's actually, it gets shed during different stages of Klingon life. It's like molting.
But yeah, so that's exciting. He's wearing gold. He's now, I believe, chief of security. Riker has literally grown the beard.
Boom.
Which
Riker
is
beard.
now like a thing that people sometimes say about television shows when they like get good in the second season. They grew the beard.
Really? Is that so? That comes from this in particular. From
I
Riker.
think so. I thought, well, on the website TV Tropes uses that. So
That's amazing.
There you go. Yeah.
That's great. Picard refers to LaForge as chief engineer.
Yeah. LaForge is also wearing gold, and I noticed
Boom.
he got a haircut. You know what was weird though? Like like through watching Star Trek my entire life, I've never watched a whole lot of season 1, right? And there are fewer episodes in season 1 than the rest of the show. So like to me, it was always normal to see Riker with a beard and then not without. But now that because I haven't really been watching other episodes, I've only been watching the one that we're recording for. So I haven't watched anything from not season 1 in like a while. So seeing Riker with a beard, I was like, oh, that's strange.
Characters are now falling into the places we know them to be ending up eventually.
It's nice.
Yes.
And there is a really nice, like Picard says, like he calls Geordi chief engineer and Riker's like, oh yeah, still has a nice ring to it. And it really does.
It's nice. And that's where Geordi, that's where we know him. That's where he belongs in engineering, making things work.
Yeah, so he's created where they're transporting something, we don't know what yet, but he's created these like little containment units, which will then go into a larger containment unit. And so they'll each have their own like special controls and yeah, because he's a good engineer. So he's created this awesome containment thing.
Yeah, it's like these little like hexagon things, and then it goes in one giant hexagon thing.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, we'll actually see that appear a couple times in the series.
They reuse their
Hey, it's a cool set piece.
Cool
all that work
piece.
into it, make sure you use it again. Yep.
Riker tells Wesley has a new uniform as well. It doesn't have the colors on the shoulders, it's all gray, but he tells Wesley to take the ship to Odette 9, and then as the ship is on its way, a little glowy ball enters the ship from outer space, and like Data notices something, but no one really knows what it is.
Yeah, he doesn't see it, but he notices it on the sensor panel.
Yeah.
He's like, there's some kind of energy that's on the sensors, and he's like, oh, maybe it was nothing, because no one else seems to pick it up.
Yeah, so we see it like travel through the corridor, and we see like a little glowy perspective. And then, so it goes through a couple crew members' quarters, and then it finds Troi, and like it literally goes like up between, like it enters her body, but like between her legs.
Yeah, I remember actually watching this scene when it first aired.
Yeah.
And how like visibly uncomfortable everyone in the room got at that scene. I remember feeling the tension.
Bet.
And it is like watching it again, it is an uncomfortable scene.
It's so uncomfortable. I also like, okay, so we said in the intro like of what happens, like this thing impregnates Troi, but like, I mean, that's assault. Like it rapes her.
Yeah,
like
she's raped.
Yeah. And it's the whole episode, I think there's a lot, this is like probably the best pregnancy that anyone has ever had in the history of anything, of any species. And I think that's maybe done to like be like, no, it's okay, it's not a traumatic experience, but this entire episode is a traumatic experience.
Yes.
And it's
and it was almost like they try to walk around that so they can have the story they wanted to have.
Yes.
But it kind of means you have to ignore some of this stuff. That's weird.
Yes. And to tie it back to our very brief check-in, ignoring that stuff is how you get to like, reproductive rights aren't actually that important.
Or they're super important, but we're going to leverage them to our political agenda.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then we go into the introduction, and so we don't have Gates McFadden as Crusher anymore. She is gone. And Pulaski, so it's Diana Muldaur, and she's like a special guest star. She's not in the main credits.
Yeah, I don't remember if that changes or not, but
I can't remember.
I don't know if they knew what was going on with this character. So yeah, Gates McFadden.
I think
I've heard different
fired,
reasons
yeah.
as to why she left the show.
Okay.
At this point, but from what I understand, that there were issues concerning like harassment. From some of the producers. Anyways, I don't want to cause too much speculation, but these are things that I've heard from behind the scenes. Yeah. And I don't know if all of it is. I should have looked this up ahead of time.
That's okay. I mean, one thing I heard was that they were like, we have too many women.
Wow.
So they got rid. So I mean, they'd already gotten rid of Yar, and then they got rid of Crusher, and so they've got this like special guest star. What I do want to sort of look at this season, starting with this episode, is just how Pulaski is depicted. She tends to be a fairly unpopular character. I think part of it is because she's not Crusher, and people like Crusher. Also, I think part of it is because her actor is maybe like a little older, not as like super skinny as Gates McFadden was. So like there's just a lot of sexism and misogyny in that.
Yeah, similar to what I said last season about Picard, and when he was first introduced, and then as a kid being like, oh my God, he's like so old, like he's ancient. And I remember thinking about that with Pulaski, thinking like, oh my God, like she's so old. And then I go back and you watch the episode, you're like, oh, she's actually not that. She's not that, that old.
She's really not. She was in original Trek in a few episodes.
Yeah.
She played a couple of different characters, I think. Yeah, I've got it here. She played like Anne Mulhall and Miranda Jones.
Yeah, I think it's Miranda Jones. She gets taken over by some like ancient intelligence inside of a glowy space ball. It's a great episode.
Not unlike what's going on over here.
Yeah, similar. Well, different. It's not like an impregnation.
Right.
But yeah, like it's her, Kirk, and Spock all get taken over by these ancient aliens. And then Kirk and her, like their past being lives, like were in love with each other. So she becomes like the de facto love interest then in that story.
Of course. Yeah. Gotta have a love interest.
For Kirk, yeah, of course. Yeah. So anyways, Pulaski they do like there's basically no introduction. She's just like, I need to see Picard right away because Troi has gone to see her.
Yeah. You know what's really weird? Okay, so the thing is, like, yeah, she hasn't reported in yet. She's not in sick bay. She's in 10 forward. And Picard is like annoyed with that. So again, they're not really setting us up to like her because her first thing, she annoys Picard.
Right, which is also not her fault because this is the writers shortcutting again to say like, well, we introduced Pulaski. We also now need to introduce this new set.
Yeah.
Because this is the first time we see 10 forward in Star Trek.
And it's also really weird. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but like, how did this conversation go down? Troi came to see her and was like, I'm pregnant. This is a weird thing that happened last night through magic. And Pulaski was like, you know what? Let's not talk about this in the doctor's office. Let's go to the bar. Like it's sort of set up to be like, no, this makes sense that she's not in sickbay because Troi is talking to her. But there's nowhere more private to talk. Like they didn't want to go to someone. Anyway, before Picard goes to see Pulaski in 10 forward, he like gets onto the turbo lift. Wesley gets off like onto the bridge as Picard is getting on, and then Wesley turns around and gets back on to join Picard on the turbo lift, and then just stares at him silently until Picard's like, so I guess, sorry, this mission is going to delay your reunion with your mom. But it's weird. Like, what was Wesley like? He clearly got off the turbo lift to be on the bridge, and then he just got back on the turbo. It was this happens a couple times.
I think, well, as we find out later in this episode, Wesley's dealing with some internal conflict over
so
over some decisions.
Him just act a little awkward.
Well, maybe that, and maybe he wants to talk to Picard, but he's chickening out.
Yeah,
so he's just he can't. Picard's intimidating. If you're an ensign,
acting ensign.
If you're acting ensign and you're looking up to this person, not only as your commanding officer, but also like your father figure in your life, Picard intimidated me when I was a kid. I get it.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, okay, so then we see 10 forward. We meet Guinan, played by Whoopi Goldberg.
Yep.
The amazing Whoopi Goldberg. This is what I've heard from what I've read in multiple places, that she really wanted to be in the show. And so she asked LeVar Burton to ask Gene Roddenberry to write a part for her. And
well, Whoopi Goldberg was also like kind of at the height of her career at this time too, if I remember. So having like a big name actor on Star Trek was a big deal.
Yeah, but apparently Gene Roddenberry didn't believe LeVar Burton at first, so he like kept not doing it because he was like, Whoopi Goldberg doesn't want to be on our silly little show, and then she had to be like, no, I really do. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, so, no, that's awesome.
Picard, he kind of starts to give Pulaski a bit of a dressing down, and she's like, no, you sit down. And we see that Troi is, in a new outfit. Also, another change. Troy's got long curly hair and a different jumpsuit from her season 1.
We see that Pulaski's another introduction of her dynamic with Picard here is that she's not intimidated by Picard, like really at all.
Yeah.
And she's fine to just interrupt him and kind of tell him what needs to be done. Yeah. And that makes sense because again, that's the dynamic that can happen between a chief medical officer and a captain. It's the only other person that can really pull rank.
Absolutely. I was thinking like there's no one else. It makes sense for the doctor to be allowed to say, sit down, captain, but I don't think anyone else could ever say that.
No, and he does because he's like, well, I guess I gotta know what's going on.
Yeah.
Next scene, we're in the observation lounge, and obviously Picard's been briefed on what's going on. Picard introduces Pulaski to the senior staff, but then says there's not really the time for introductions because
we've got this
Troi
weird thing
pregnant.
going on. Yeah, so Troy is pregnant, and Pulaski kind of explains like it's not a normal pregnancy. They think that conception took place like 10 hours ago or 11 hours ago or whatever it was. And during the first examination, like the fetus seemed to be about 6 weeks old. And then several hours later, the same fetus seemed to be several weeks older. So basically this fetus is on track to be born in 36 hours, as opposed to the regular Betazoid gestation period of about 10 months.
10 months. I will say here that I was kind of disappointed in Riker's reaction to this whole thing, because even before that, when they mentioned that she's pregnant, he's like, well, this is unexpected. And you're like, dude, if we're all having a conversation about this around a table, it's probably because something's up.
Yeah.
And that wasn't super supportive.
And then
to just be like, well, I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
She wanted you to go and tell you, oh, hey, by the way.
Yeah. And then he also, like, he says, I don't mean to be indelicate, and then asks, like, the most indelicate question.
Yeah.
Who's the father? Like, that's really, A, none of your business, and B, not at all relevant. Like, there's something really weird going on here. Who the father is not of as much importance as, like, what's going on in Troy's body.
I wonder if that was his way of trying to explain the oddness of the pregnancy. You can say, oh, well, it was it's Joe the fish alien down the hallway. Okay, well, that makes sense because their species gestates in 5 days or whatever. Like, but it doesn't seem to be that's not the way, the spirit of his question.
No, it's more that he's like, I don't know. I mean, it does seem weirdly controlling of like what Troi does with her body.
Yeah, so Riker doesn't handle that part super great. Obviously, there's personal feelings there that are probably getting in the way.
For sure. So she explains that a presence she felt entering her body.
So the staff voices go all echoey. And I thought that this was... I think it's an important scene because you have an entire group of people with power who are not the pregnant person, all having conversations about what's going to happen with her and her child.
Yeah, and all of them except for the doctor, who is not contributing to this conversation, all of them are people who will not get pregnant.
Including Data.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I thought that was very poignant even to today about how conversations around pregnancy and where the power of pregnancy happens. Because if there's one comment that's made quite often by abortion rights advocates, it's like, who's making these decisions around the tables? And when you usually get pictures of those people, they're all people who will never get pregnant.
Right. The other thing that I think is important about this is that often when people talk about like abortion rights and reproductive rights, a lot of the time it's really framed as like there are people who are pro-abortion and people who are, the language they use, which is not accurate, is pro-life. And that's not actually how it is. Like in this scene, so they're all talking about, Lissa Worf wants to terminate the pregnancy, Data wants to study it, Riker wants to know what the risks will be to Troi if they terminate the pregnancy, and Troi interrupts them all and says that she is having this baby. And that's the whole thing with the like reproductive justice and the pro-choice side of the argument, I guess, is it's not about, you know, there are people who just want abortions to, I mean, abortions should be accessible and should be easy to get and should be perfectly legal, and that is 100% true, so that people can make choices about their body. And this choice that Troi is choosing to make is just as important as the choice to terminate the pregnancy if that were her choice. Right? Like and I think that a lot of the time the anti-choice side likes to frame it as like, well, the people who like abortions are like anti-baby, and that's not the case, or that they're anti-pregnancy, and that's not the case. People who fight it, people who argue in favor of abortion are fighting for people to have autonomy of their own bodies, and that's choosing whether to keep a pregnancy or not.
Yeah, and in the end, it obfuscates the wider societal context of what happens when a person has a child.
Yeah.
How does it affect their socioeconomic status, their access to resources, which resources they will have access to depending on who has that child. So yeah, it completely negates all of the wider context there and into this weird oversimplification of how things work. The wider thing here too is like it's always been shown that if you want to reduce abortions, it's not by creating harsher abortion laws. It's by providing like the access to resources, sexual education that's required for people to make these informed choices and decisions and lifting them out of poverty.
But I do think that it's an important scene, and also Picard's like answer to Troi is absolutely the right one when she says, I'm having this. She's like, do what you want to protect the ship, but I'm having this baby. And he's like, okay, well then that's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, and that should have been true regardless of how she answered that.
Exactly.
Right? So even if she's like, well, it's ultimately my choice and I decide not to have the child, then he also should have responded the same way. Yeah. And we hope that would be true. And I think it would be.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little bit of a weird, just the way it's written is really weird, because you would have thought that maybe she could have told him this, like he would have given her an opportunity to tell him this before they started the conversation. Like, what did they talk about at 10 Forward? Was she just like, I'm pregnant? And he was like, all right, let's call a staff meeting. Like,
that's a good point. In the reality of how the flow of dialogue probably would have gone, it doesn't really make sense. But I think it was written so that scene could be there.
Yes.
Yeah. And it is an important scene, and it's still relevant to today's conversation around all of this going on.
So they're on their way to Odette 9.
Troi is very pregnant, but doesn't feel any discomfort. And that's something that keeps coming up, is that it's a very comfortable pregnancy.
It is. And again, this is like, that. I mean, I think they do that so that people aren't like, wow, this is a horrible thing that happened to her, even though it is. But I think it also contributes to this idea, or it plays into this idea that like when people get pregnant, they're just these containers for the baby. They're not like, it's not a biological process that their own body is going through.
Right. And they very much, that distinction is just not talked about, because the strangeness is with the fetus, but like Troy's body also would have to accommodate a fetus that's growing that fast.
Yeah.
And
there's
how would that we don't talk about that at all.
Yeah, she's like, I should be uncomfortable with all the changes going on, but no, I feel great. There is a really funny scene where like Wesley turns around in his chair and Riker's like, standard orbit, ensign. And he's like, oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah, don't crash the ship, please.
Yeah, and stop staring at the pregnant person on the bridge.
The bridge. Picard talks to Lieutenant Commander Hester Delt on Odette 9. He wants to look at the containment unit for plague specimens. He wants to come aboard, basically check it out. Picard asks for a complete manifest of what's being brought on board. Yeah,
basically, like they're being really careful, and I think that's what it takes like 14 hours for Delt to look at the containment unit, and Picard like wants a list of absolutely every specimen. So I think they're just I think this is to let us know just how potentially dangerous this situation is, because what they're doing, we didn't really say this, but the captain's log at the beginning is like there's a plasma plague somewhere, and they're transporting specimens of a plasma plague. I don't know what that is. Is that a real thing? I didn't look at it.
I don't think so.
But they're transporting specimens of the plasma plague to basically to hopefully find a cure or an antidote or a vaccine.
They're going to make a vaccine. Yeah. Also relevant to today.
But to do that, they have to like transport these really dangerous specimens. So they're being really careful.
Yeah. Different samples and variations of plasma plague. So one of them will hopefully create the necessary antidote.
Different variants, basically. Which is also very relevant to what we've got going on right now in the world.
Yes. Yeah. They have like the Omicron plasma plague. Picard sends Data to review the manifest with Pulaski, and he encounters Troi on his way there.
She's ready to give birth.
Data calls Worf to assemble a security team because we don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come out of her. We don't know.
Yeah. Might
be dangerous.
Could be dangerous. And then again, there's like I'm not going to blame Pulaski for this. I'm going to blame the writers 100%. She's like, in my other deliveries, except for a couple, the father was always present. Like, really? Really?
Boo.
There weren't like single parents having kids? Or
yeah,
like,
it's very like,
it's very
kind
like,
of heteronormative.
Super heteronormative and like nuclear family centric.
Yeah.
And then she also, and so this is where like Pulaski, I think this is one of the reasons she becomes a not very popular character, is Data's like, oh, I can provide support. And she's like, no. Troi needs like a human, a warm human, not a cold android. Like she's basically like, go away, robot boy. And Troy's like, no, Data will be fine. He is my friend, for crying out loud.
Yeah, they kind of are set up as sort of like the traditional conservative country doctor kind of feel, I guess.
I think that there's a little bit of the dynamic that was in the original Trek with McCoy and Kirk always like fighting, and then McCoy not getting Spock because Spock is logical and McCoy was very emotional. Like I think there's a little bit of that Pulaski's like McCoy, able to tell off Picard, and also she like doesn't understand Data.
Yeah, I never remember. I'd have to go back and watch those episodes again, but I don't remember McCoy ever being like openly bigoted toward people.
I think he did make at the beginning of this series when he's on the Enterprise with Data, and Data's like, I'm an android, and he's like, oh, almost as bad as a Vulcan. So.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, yeah. Of course he was to Spock all the time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was thinking more toward like just around like anatomy, biology,
right? Yeah. No,
that kind of stuff.
But just to go
like, Spock all the time. What am I thinking?
You don't understand emotions, and so I feel like they're setting that up a little bit, but it's not. Data's already this like super popular character, so I really don't feel like the writers gave Pulaski a chance to be liked.
Data's fascinated and wants to know all kinds of questions. He's like, can you feel the baby's like emotions inside of you? Like, when did you become aware of them? Like, just goes into the super like I'm curiosity mode, which is not really appropriate, but that's on par for Data. And now all of a sudden, though, the baby is being born and Troi is in no pain. Pulaski wants to give her basically a pain suppressant, and she's like, no, I'm not feeling any pain at all.
I can't even say like bed. It's like a birthing chair that Troi is in, and it's really cool. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is how, like, I think it's a lot of the time when we see like babies being born, the person giving birth is like lying down and their like feet are up, and that I think the reason we have that is that like that's easier for doctors because they can like stand and whatever, but it's actually much easier to like get gravity to work with you. So she's in this like cool chair, but just like tilted, so the baby's like coming out of her going downwards.
Yeah, more biologically sensible.
Yeah,
future birthing chair.
Yeah. And then Riker enters and just kind of watches without anyone noticing.
We don't know if he had permission. He just kind of like strolls in. He's like, I get to watch.
Yeah, it bugged me. And then we have this very cute baby. We cut to Worf just looking serious.
Scowling.
And Data, I love Data here. He's so amazed by it. He loves it.
Pulaski asks if EV births are norm for betazoids, which I feel like she should know because Beta's head's like a major component of the Federation, and she probably would have studied Beta's head like anatomy, but whatever.
You'd think.
It's just a way for them to have like a a conversation for the audience.
Yeah.
And Troi says no, that not according to her mother, which she makes a joke about this.
I mean, you know that Loxana is the kind of person who told
your birth
story.
was very difficult.
Yeah, and she told that story like, you know, at dinner parties.
At dinner parties, yeah.
Just like everyone knows Troy's birthing story. Like,
yeah. Worf checks the baby out, basically analyzes that it's not a threat. So Worf checks out because he's like, well, obviously I'm not needed here. And then Data is very thankful that he had the experience to be there.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Troi names the baby Ian Andrew after her father. And then I remember actually like watching this, probably not the first time I saw it because I was really young the first time I saw it, but like watching this and thinking that Troi would be annoyed that Riker just walked in without anyone knowing.
Yeah.
I would guess that she probably could sense him because like she can sense,
but
you know.
Still doesn't mean they had permission to be there.
But then she's like happy. She's like, oh, were you here the whole time? And he's like, yes, I was. And like gives her a kiss on the cheek. And I don't know. I can, it's not written. It's written like to be this sweet moment between the two of them, but that doesn't ring true for me, especially because of how weird he was when he found out she was pregnant. Like,
yeah, earlier. Yeah, she's given a lot of leeway here. The character is not written as if she's carrying that as a burden, but she probably should be.
Yeah, I feel like as I've never given birth, but like I feel that if I ever were to, I would want to know who was going to be in the room and have like vetted that and not just be like, yeah.
Can I just be there for this moment? Like at least ask.
Yeah.
Pulaski is very suspicious that Troi feels so good following the pregnancy. And the next day when they're on the bridge, Pulaski enters and tells Picard that she's still like surprised by how easy the birth was.
Yeah.
That there was no trauma to the body, no lasting impacts. And in fact, that if she had ever studied Troi again, had she not known the pregnancy had occurred, she may not even have any like physical signs that she ever was pregnant before.
So again, like that whole idea of like Troy's body is just a vessel for this being.
Yeah,
it's
for
not,
the plot.
Yeah, exactly. A vessel for the plot. We can just use
literally
uteruses as a plot vessel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Picard and Pulaski go to visit Troi, and Ian has grown to be this like adorable, like seriously so cute, like almost 4-year-old.
Black curly hair.
He is,
but of course,
so cute.
The characters are terrified because
he can talk.
He is 4 years old in a day.
Yeah.
And then he talks, and so I was watching the video on faster speed so I can get through the episode. And so all of a sudden when he starts talking, because they're already like creeped out, and he starts speaking, and it was like this really high pitched tone because of the accelerated video, and he's like, "Hello everybody," and I was like, "Oh my god, that's actually really creepy." But
it's not like that in regular speed. Like it's still pretty high, and he's like, "Don't worry." Yeah. And also the things that he's saying are not necessarily things you would expect to hear from a 4-year-old. He's like, "Don't worry, especially when they're telling you, okay, like
everything's fine." You're like, "It's not fine." Oh my god. So it is
weird.
It's scary. It's weird, and they're intimidated. But there's nothing like outside of the context of what's going on. This child is not giving off any vibes that they're aggressive or have any malintent toward anybody. So it's just that we're concerned about what's happening. It's so unusual.
Yeah, and there are a few things like throughout the episode later on where I feel like Troi kind of gets annoyed with how interested people are in what's going on with Ian. Like whenever people talk about how much he's grown, she like doesn't respond, which I feel like kind of, she's like, yeah, I know, it's weird. Can you just let me enjoy being a mom? Like
after the commercial breaks, there's a commercial break, and the captain's log says that now Ian is even older than that. He's like an 8-year-old, physically speaking.
Yeah.
And Pulaski and Data are still categorizing the specimens from the plasma plague, and we have this scene where Pulaski calls him Data rather than Data. And he says, no, it's Data. He corrects her on the pronunciation of his name.
Yeah.
And then she laughs it off and is kind of like, well, what's the difference? And he says, and I think this is really important, he's like, one is my name and one is not.
Yeah. And then instead of like, okay, so what's the difference? Like, it's not a great question to ask when someone pronounces or when someone corrects you on their pronunciation, but whatever. But then once he has said that, she like gets into this really weird, like she's like using her tricorder to like examine him and was like, ooh, in all of your circuits and your positronic net, is there a program for bruised feelings? Which like first of all, he didn't say anything about his feelings. He just corrected her. But second, if he did have bruised feelings, making fun of him probably would not be the right choice. Like,
no, if there's anyone who seemed to have bruised feelings and ego in that moment, it looked like it was her
100%
on being corrected on the pronunciation of his name.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of a dick
it is.
move on her part. And like you said, it's one of those things that it's almost like she was written intentionally to be disliked by the audience.
I do want to ask you, Matthew, how do you pronounce that word when it's not this character's name?
Oh, it's always Data.
Okay, same.
Always, yeah.
I won't say data to mean like information.
I've heard it pronounced data probably like 0.5% in my whole life, probably because of this show. So
I've definitely had people
data.
like there's a grade 12 math course, data management, and a lot of people call it data management or data.
No, it's wrong.
I always call it data management.
Yeah. You should correct them on the pronunciation.
One is my name. The other is not. One is the course's name. The other is not.
The other is not. Yeah. Pulaski tells Picard that if anything gets loose from this containment, the best case, is that the entire ship is destroyed. And I was wondering what are the other cases then?
I one thing I do have to say, I was watching this episode with my sister last night. And they're talking about this one specimen that's been like genetically engineered, and Pulaski says some eager beaver has like forced this virus to mutate, and my sister said eager beaver genetic engineer.
That is brilliant.
So,
clearly we have to have her as a guest host on the show.
So she can come up with good rhymes for us.
Yeah.
Eager beaver. But yeah, so it's bad. Like, and also he's like, so what should we do? And she's like, no, we can't do anything. We need to do this. I just want you to fully understand how bad it is. Yeah. Yes, I just wanted the audience to understand.
Yeah, we don't know what a plasma plague is, but it'll kill everything. So we're like, okay, it's bad.
Yeah, best case scenario, everyone dies.
Data leaves Pulaski and she mispronounces his name again, corrects herself, but then says whatever, as if people's names being pronounced correctly isn't important. At least in this case, because, this is kind of an ongoing thing with Data and Pulaski, is that she doesn't really see him as a genuine life form, I suppose.
Not a person.
Not a person.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that more this season too.
We will.
Ian is now older than we last saw him, plays with puppies in the nursery, which are also very cute. There's so much cute with this.
Such a cute episode with such weird, horrible things happening. But yeah, he's really having fun with the puppies.
Yeah. Teacher says that he is very tactile, wants to touch everything. And he's learning, right? He's a kid. That's what kids do. They want to touch everything and then stick them in their mouths and explore. That's how they do.
Yeah. And then this is another moment where Troy's like, okay, it's time to go. Let's go get something to eat. And the teacher, Miss Gladstone is her name, that she's like, oh my gosh, he's even grown since he arrived. And Troi just doesn't answer.
Yeah. It's like, oh, really? I didn't notice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, okay, I know. I have a weird baby. Stop going on about it.
Cole Meany's here again.
Cole Meany. I don't know if he's credited.
He's still just transporter. No, he's just transporter chief still. Yeah, I noticed that at the end. Yeah.
But he's back. This is the second time. We had him in the first season premiere and now the second season premiere. We didn't see him all first season.
So he's still running the transporter and he helps Data beam up the first batch of specimens. So they're on these screens and displays, they're seeing the tiny hexagon blocky things being loaded into the big hexagon-y blocky thing. And they have to transport them in sequence. They can't do them all at once. So they're being beamed up and inserted by the transporter.
Yeah, and they're being they're not he's doing that from the transporter room, but they're being transported from the planet directly to the cargo bay where Hester, Delt, and LaForge and Riker are all there to keep an eye on it and make sure everything's going well. So then Pulaski and Picard again stop by Troi's quarters. This is the next day, not even. They stop by Troi's quarters to check on Ian again. And again, Troi seems annoyed. And this is funny to me. There's a cute scene where Ian's he invites them to stay for supper and he asks if Picard has ever played with puppies. He hasn't, apparently.
That explains some things about Picard, if I may say so.
And then he sticks his finger in his food and burns himself. And Pulaski treats it, and then he's crying and he's like, my face is wet. But then Pulaski and Picard kind of go off to the side and she's like, he deliberately allowed himself to be burnt. But that's normal child behavior, right? Like kids
Picard's
do
like,
that.
he wanted to experience it.
Like this is not the thing that I would be worried about.
No, I guess they're trying to figure out, like, well, he's intelligent enough already to speak, knows language. Why wouldn't he know what being burned is like? But so if there's that, like, what things are innate to this being and what things they still need to experience. I guess they're trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And so Picard starts to like ask him some questions. And I actually like the answers. He gives like really literal answers. He's like, why are you here? And Ian's like, oh, because mommy said it was time to eat.
Picard laughs.
Yeah.
He's like, okay.
He's like, no, but like here. And he's like, well, I live here. I live on this ship.
Yeah.
And then
he does.
It's interesting, like Troi, I guess, maybe they've had this conversation already, that she's like, the captain wants to know why you came here, and he's not ready to say yet. And she can sense that he knows the answer, or like he has the answer inside somewhere, but his cognitive powers haven't developed enough to explain. So there's I think, there is an interesting thing where this glowy ball of energy, it has some knowledge, but it doesn't have like the understanding beyond what an 8-year-old kid would have. So it can't communicate that yet, which is an interesting thing to happen.
Cargo is secure, and so the ship is now heading for the Richellis system. And they go back to 10 forward. There's actually kind of a neat view here because the camera is swinging around to 10 forward from the outside of the ship.
Yeah.
So you can see sections of the hull, and it's actually looking through the windows of 10 forward from outside. And I can't actually recall any time that they ever do that shot again, because you're always usually looking from 10 forward out. Mm-hmm. And so if originally we're looking through the windows from outside, and we can see Wesley gazing out the window.
Yeah.
As he's watching, you can see the planet drop away as the ship is breaking orbit, and the lighting like changes through 10 forward as the ship is moving. You usually don't get scenes like that through the really front view, so it's kind of cool. It is pretty cool. And as he's standing there thoughtfully, Guinan notices and approaches him.
Yeah. And they have they talk about the view. She's like, what do you see when you look out there? But she keeps offering him different drinks, and he says he doesn't want anything, but she keeps offering. And then eventually he's like, why do you keep asking me this? And she says that she's doing, like, she does it because that's what's expected of her. And then kind of segues into like, do you always do what's expected of you? And kind of, and basically making him consider the fact that he does not want to leave the Enterprise, and the fact that he's expected to do it isn't necessarily, a reason to do it.
Yeah, he wants to stay.
He does.
And they're setting up Guinan now as the role that she's going to play on the ship, which is a sort of like I don't want to say counselor, because that's Troy's role, but sort of the wise sage aboard the Enterprise.
It is part of like a problematic trope, which is in a lot of shows and movies. There's like a character who is most of the time like a black character, whose main role is to help other people discover things about themselves. So like they don't have their own goals or needs. And there is even like later on, there's a part where she says to Wesley, like, it's what I'm here for. And I like saw that. I was like, oh God, like what you're here for is to help everyone else with their character development.
They're not really a part of they're part of the society and the crew in this case, but not really. They're kind of just there to help other people.
Exactly.
Right.
So that is problematic. Yeah. I mean, it's great. Whoopi Goldberg is amazing as Guinan, but it's definitely, it would have been nice to at some point at all in the series to have gotten like, what does Guinan want? And that's not really.
Yeah. What I do appreciate about her character is that it's not just a one-off, and she does have more of a role, like and some important roles in some of the episodes later on.
She does, and also like people trust her sort of implicitly. No one ever doubts her. No one's like, oh, who knows what you're talking about? Like, yeah.
And side note, sounds like she's coming back in this second season of Picard.
Does it? Do you think so?
Yeah, apparently that's the thing. Right. She's going to be in the second season of Picard. So I'm. Oh,
maybe I did know that actually, because he asked her like on The View or something, right?
Yeah. I don't know if that was like a formal request or whatever, but apparently it's actually.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I do like about, or like the whole story about how Guinan's character came to be was that she grew up watching the original Trek, and just the fact that Uhura was on the screen, she was like, that was the only depiction of the future that had Black people in it.
Right.
So,
yeah. And she talks about the importance of that for her. And I'm sure that they've met as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Both Nichelle Nichols and Whoopi Goldberg. There's an alarm in the cargo deck, and Delt detects growth in one of the specimen containers. So they're all supposed to be, these specimens are supposed to be in stasis, and they should not be growing. We have the specimens, we're bringing them to the place where they're going to be turned into vaccines and stuff, but one of them is growing on the way, and it's going to get out of the container, and that would be really bad.
I like it. There's like a part where Geordi's like, no, there's no way it can break through this. And honestly, what it looks like he's like tapping when he says this is like a plastic
pipe. A plastic tube.
Yeah, like there's like, really? That's not up. I don't know. I trust Geordi's engineering for sure.
Oh yeah, he's got pride in this in his hexagon box that he built. So there's like no way. But then Delt's like, no, this thing is voracious. It'll eat the machine or whatever.
And Pulaski's like, we have to destroy it. And Delt's like, we can't. And they're like, okay, well then let's jettison it out of the ship. And he's like, no, we can't do that. It'll go into a spore, and then when it comes into contact with another planet or a ship, it'll destroy that. So basically, it's like there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, I was like, okay, for sake of plot, I get that, but I think sometimes these shows, because we're so used to moving around so fast and getting from place to place, they kind of forget that space is really, really big. And if you just like throw some box out into space, the odds of it hitting another ship or a planet or anything is like astronomically small. Yeah. I also I was like, can you just shoot it into a star? Anyways,
no.
There's always ways to get rid of stuff in space, but I get you. Yeah. I hear you.
So the idea is that they'll like evacuate non-essential personnel to the saucer section, and then separate if necessary. But then Pulaski, and this is, she can be a good scientist too. She's like, okay, well, what is it about this one? Why is this one growing, not the other ones? And they realize that this particular strain grows when it is exposed to Eichner radiation.
Yeah, I don't think Eichner radiation is real.
No, it comes from glowing energy beings.
Glowing energy beings.
But apparently,
it just happened to be on the ship.
Yeah, because there wasn't any on the ship before. Can I just say also, I love the way this guy plays Hester Delt. He's just so casual about things. Like Riker's like, why didn't you notice this before? And he's like, I don't know. I guess it wasn't here before.
Yeah, he's like pretty serious about his work though. I like how he can go between like chill and then super like panicky.
Yeah, I like
not panicky, but like directed to the point so fast. I was like, I would love to see more of this character.
I like him a lot. With his mustache too.
He's so cool. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Yeah, but basically he's like, there wasn't any Eichner radiation on the ship before, so we didn't detect any, but now we are detecting it. And they're like, where could it come from? And
where could it be from?
Immediate cut to Ian going to bed.
And he and Troi can both tell that, he's like, I could tell that people are worried on the ship because he has empathic abilities as well. And then he's just like, he's like, I'm the reason why people are worried. I have to leave now. And then he's like, he starts dying.
Yeah, and Troi like realizes that he's dying and is like, starts freaking out, understandably, calls the doctor to come to her quarters, and Pulaski shows up with Data and Riker, and Pulaski's like, did anything happen? And she's like, no, he's just dying. And they realize that he is the source of the Eichner radiation.
Pulaski says that she's losing the life signs, and then Ian just dies.
Troi gets, and Marina Sirtis, I think also, like that sometimes her character can be like sort of over the top or written in like a not super believable way. This scene, I don't know, she really sold it for me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I was sad. It's a sad
really
scene.
Sad, and she had a really like subtle way of like the crying when like he turns into this glowy ball and she's like holding it and looking at it, and then goes from like really sad to like smiling a little bit. She did it really well. Yeah.
However, though, rather than just being dead and gone, Ian transforms back into the glowy energy ball and floats into Troi's hands. Yeah. And you realize by her facial expressions that she's actually communicating with it telepathically. And she smiles, and then it flies through the ship's hull and disappears.
Yeah, and LaForge is like, oh, everything's fine now. So Troi explains that that Ian, or whatever it was that turned into Ian, is a life force entity. The ship passed it in space, and it was curious and decided the best way to learn was to go through the life process. So to be born, to live as a person and understand people.
Yeah, I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
I started thinking about it in terms of both space, but also time.
Okay.
And like our relationship to things and to people are both spatial, but also temporal. And so if you're born into the space of people's lives, but you don't go through the time of that life, then you're not really learning about life. You know, like if you're going to be born as a child, but then you age 8 years in a couple days, you're not experiencing like the culture that happens that when you experience the growth through
You don't
people's
actually experience
timeline.
childhood or like.
You're not really experiencing childhood. Like everything's going to be different. So I get the logic of what the alien's trying to do, but you're not really going to learn about life on a ship if you're so out of step with like the temporal part of our connection to a person, their life and their culture and stuff.
I was having a conversation with some colleagues recently, and we were talking about teaching and sort of reflecting back on when we first started teaching versus now, having done it for many years. And like, I think there's a similar thing. Like, you can't skip ahead to being an experienced teacher.
Right.
And that's true of anything in life, right? Like you can't really experience being an 8-year-old without being like a baby, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, 3.
Yes.
You can't, because being an 8-year, yeah, he like, I guess, and I'm sort of like that scene with burning himself, that usually kids burn themselves at maybe a younger age. I don't know, like intentionally do that, kind of seek out those kind of tactile sensations quite like very young, because they don't know what they're like. And then you get, so yeah, he as an 8-year-old, he wasn't necessarily an 8-year-old. I mean, he wasn't. Yeah. He was like a 1-day-year-old. So
obviously she's crying and she's upset. And I wish that people had, like, they all just leave.
I know. Even Riker. Standing there watching her give birth.
Yeah, I got to be there for giving birth because that's where people want to be around. But now it's uncomfortable. She's sad and there's loss, and we're just going to take off and leave her there by herself. So I thought that was kind of weird that everyone just like leaves and no one stays with her to support her in her loss.
Yeah. Also, what's weird is that like this episode is going to like never come up again.
Yeah, as with a lot of these
episodes.
I
know that's like normal for Star Trek, but like...
Yeah, I was thinking about that when Pulaski says earlier, she's like, it's like there was no trauma done to her body whatsoever for the pregnancy. Yeah, it's like that with every episode. It's like as if these things just don't actually happen to the characters.
Yeah, it does no lasting effect.
So on the bridge, they've arrived to the Richella system. They start beaming the cargo back down, reversing the loading sequence that they had from earlier. Yeah. And Wesley approaches Picard and says that he would like to say something to him. And Picard is like, in my ready room, when your duties allow.
Yeah, nothing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here, Wesley. But basically what he wants to talk about is that he wants to stay on the Enterprise. He hasn't talked about it with Crusher, with his mom yet. He wants to get the captain's permission first, but he feels like he belongs here, and probably Will Wheaton has a contract with the show, so... Picard
tells everyone that Wesley wants to stay.
Yeah, because he doesn't answer him, right? Like, when he says, I want to stay, and Picard's like, okay, go back to your post.
Yeah, and Picard says, I would have given an answer, but I think he's like, this inconveniences everybody on the ship.
Yeah.
So we have to be willing to do it. So everyone's going to have to take care of him. So what about his studies? And he says, Data will see to that. Yeah. And then Riker says, well, who's going to tuck him in at night?
And Worf volunteers.
I volunteer. I like how at least Wesley turns around on that comment and is like, Commander.
Yeah. What's cute also, though, is he's like when Worf volunteers for that, and Troy's like, well, so we know he'll be getting his sleep if Worf is the one putting you to bed.
And then Picard says that Riker will supervise him growing up. There was an article that I had, it was a post that Will Wheaton had made on Facebook about 2 weeks ago. And it was actually about how Jonathan Frakes like treated him so well on the set of Star Trek, and how he kind of left the show because in the write-up he talks about some of the difficulties he was having with producers on the show who just treated him very poorly. But that he looked up to Jonathan Frakes so much and just thought he was like so cool, and how Frakes like really took him under his wing, and whenever they had scenes together he always loved it. And so in a way it was almost like that he does take on this role.
He does. Yeah, it is really sweet when whenever he talks about Frakes, like when he's talking about Gates McFadden, he always calls her Space Mom, and it's really Mom. Cute. But also his relationship with Frakes seems really sweet. He also posted a thing on Instagram a little while ago, like a couple days ago. It was a photo of him like hugging Gates McFadden, there's a cake, and like Jonathan Frakes and Patrick Stewart are like in the background, and it was from his like goodbye party when he eventually did leave the show, and he was like, I've got a lot of feelings about this, but it's, I mean, they really, you know, he was a child when they were filming this, and that was his family, and kind of like Wesley. That's his
and
family.
still is,
Yeah.
you know, in a way.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know. I think it's cool to know that behind the scenes that the cast had that kind of relationship, because and to knowing that, to me, it makes the series seem even more believable and real. That, you know, that as a crew, that behind the scenes that they were actually a crew as well, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like it. I'm a fan.
I'm a fan too.
Now that they've got all that settled, Picard is like, okay, Wesley, you've got my permission, but your mom gets final say.
Mom gets final say.
He's like,
just to let everyone know that she's still around.
She still exists. Yes. I think this is like the last time she's going to be mentioned until what she's doing, according to the show, is she's head of Starfleet Medical. So it's not like, maybe she left the show for, you know, reasons that were not great, but in the show, she left the Enterprise because she's got this huge promotion, it seems.
That's good, because it leaves a door open for the character to return.
Yeah, not like Tashigar. Holy moly.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. She's not dead. So that's good. No. Thank you so much for listening to this second season now of With the First Link. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider of choice.
Our cover art was created by Nathan Nunn, and you can find more of his work at nathannunn.ca. Our theme song is An Amazing Adventure by Flame Lion Studio. You can follow us on Instagram and now also on Twitter at FirstLinkPod, or send us an email at firstlinkpod@gmail.com to let us know if there were any other harmful tropes that we missed in this episode. I am Ruthie.
And I'm Matthew. And hey, if you're in the medical profession, maybe have private conversations not in a bar and learn people's names.
Good call.